Hi, I'm Steve McCord, Cattaraugus County Director of Veterans Services, and this is Our Veterans, Their Stories, preserving our heroes' stories, one story at a time.
My name is Joe Keary. I spent a wonderful 31 years in the Army, U.S. Army, and I'll tell you a little bit about my history. So I'm from downstate, Rockland County, and ever since my youngest days, I wanted to be a soldier. That was my, if you ask any of my classmates or my teachers from grade school, that's all I talked about. And my plan was to go to the United States Military Academy at West Point. And, I pursued my high school career, and I got 2 nominations, actually, from 2 different congressmen. And I went with Congressman Ben Gilman's nomination, and I took the board aptitude test, where you meet a panel of civilians from the community, and passed that no problem. Took the physical aptitude test, which was sort of a physical PT test, no problem with that. And I went for my medical exam, and I was being examined by a physician, and I told him that when I was younger I had had a traumatic head injury. I was hit in the head by a broom playing around. It was a swinging like a baseball bat. The end of the broom unscrewed, hit me. It was across the yard, freak accident, and I wasn't supposed to make it, but I did. And I told him, and the doctor's face went. And he looked at me and he says, "You're totally disqualified from ever attending a military academy." To say that I was hit in the stomach with a baseball bat and my wind knocked out of me, I didn't know what to say. So I drove home by myself because I thought this was a nothing. And to this day, I don't remember driving home. It was about a 40-minute drive. I don't know how I got home. I got in the house and I was devastated. So I appealed it, and they said no. You can never attend a military academy, but you can still be commissioned as an officer. So I changed my tune. I went to college, got my bachelor's degree, and I wanted to be a microbiologist in the Army. To get that, you had to have a master's, so I deferred becoming commissioned. I went and got a master's degree. And my last semester in February of 1980, as I was getting my first master's, I was commissioned. I was sworn into the Army at the 320th Evacuation Hospital at 201 Varick Street, New York City. It's no longer there. It was a reserve unit in a lower New York, Manhattan part of the city, right by the Italian, Little Italy, and Chinatown. So I joined the reserves, and I said, this is it. I'm going to serve my country this way. And I served for a number of years, for 10 years as a reservist in a variety of units, and never was the microbiologist because they didn't have labs actively functioning. So I was a personnel officer. As a lieutenant, I was a company commander of a tough New York City unit. I mean, this unit was tough New York City kids, and I was from the suburbs. So everyone, quote, predicted I wasn't going to survive. And I'll tell you just a little about the Army. I'm a young kid, and my first sergeant and command sergeant major were both long-time service. And in the reserves at that time, the company commander had to order meals for the weekend drills. So one weekend came, and Friday we had a meeting. We always had an unpaid meeting before the weekend. And the commander says, "So you ordered the meals?" And I was a grad student at the time, and I had forgotten. So no food we're talking over 200 people. So I must have looked as pale as I did when they told me I couldn't go to West Point. Well, the first sergeant and the CSM said, "Relax, Lieutenant, we got this." I'm thinking, I'm going to be court-martialed tomorrow. I'm going to lose my command. Next morning, they called all the troops together, and they said, our lieutenant made a mistake. And we hope that you'll realize that he's young and he made a mistake, an honest mistake. Anyone who wants to complain can see either the first sergeant or the command sergeant major. And I'm in my office because they said, don't come out. And I'm just waiting for the hammer to fall. No one complained. The colonel came in to see me and he says, "What happened?" And I said, and the sergeant major jumped in and says, "We take care of our lieutenants. we take care of each other here. Yeah. He was from Long Island, so he didn't know the unit at all. And I was shocked. No one complained, and I continued my command. And that was my first inclination of that a good leader takes care of their people so that in return the followers take good care of their leader when they need it. And they were there for me 100%. Stayed as a reservist for 10 years, and then one of the guys in the Army, he was a general at the time, called me and he says, we need good civilian leadership at some of our reserve units. Would you consider leaving your hospital career? I was a hospital materials manager and coming to work for the Army full time. And I'm like, without a doubt. Went home, told my wife at the time that I was switching careers, and she thought I was crazy. But I took a job with the Army as a civilian, a supervisory staff administrator, and worked for them for a number of years in a unit down in New York City, and then I got transferred up to Utica, New York when they needed me. And I always took whatever challenge the Army offered, right? Because I always said it's not a challenge, it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to do something different. And I met some wonderful people. I mean, friends I'm, to this day, started with them in 1990 full time. I'm still friends with people, and I'm friends with some of their children, actually, still. Worked for the reserves for a number of years, and then I looked to get really that microbiologist job, and I transferred to the VA as a civilian, but I stayed a reservist my whole career. Desert Storm came, and our unit was ready to be mobilized. I had packed my bags. I was ready to go, and our commanding general, the two-star in charge of the division, said, no full-timers will go. They have to stay behind to maintain the units. And again, I was devastated, but what a good soldier does is, we soldier on. We say, yes, sir, and that's it. So I stayed behind for Desert Storm. I was devastated that I wasn't going to go, but it was a very short war, and I said, well, my time will come. September 11th, in 2001, I was a member of a unit up in Connecticut, the 405th Combat Support Hospital. And again, an officer I'd served with became commander, and he called me and said, I'd like you to transfer here. So at the time I lived in the Lancaster, Pennsylvania area, and I would drive 4.5 hours to drill every weekend and then get a hotel and stay up there. Well, September 11th, I was working for the VA. We were in staff meeting, and my pager went off. We had pagers at the time. And I ran to get a call from my wife, Claudia, and she says, a plane hit the World Trade Center. And to be honest, I wasn't even that upset because statistically that could happen. I said, okay, I got to go back to the meeting, and I'm in the meeting. And shortly after that, the director's pager went off, everyone's pagers went off, and he got up on the stage, broke the presentation, says, 2 planes have struck the World Trade Center. Go back to your sections and prepare to receive casualties. The plan was that patients from the New York City VAs would be sent to us. We would take care of them so they could take care of sicker patients. So I ran back to my lab. We started to mobilize everyone. We had the TV in the waiting room on. Everyone was listening to radios. And I got back to my home that night, and my commander called me, and he said, we haven't received an order yet, but we had a hospital set at our site, and he says, I'm hoping that they'll either use that site, use our equipment, but we have to be prepared to at least go to New York City. So I called my boss that evening from home and said I wouldn't be at work the next day. Had my bags packed already, because I always did. Told my wife I'm getting up the next morning and driving up, and we're going to set up a command center and get ready to deploy to New York City. As I drove up, being from that area, my nephew worked in the lower Manhattan, went in every day by train to the basement of the World Trade Center, and I was wondering about what happened. We hadn't heard from him, and I drove by and I could look over and see the smoke, and there were tears in my eyes as I drove. I had to drive all the way up to Poughkeepsie and cut back because all the bridges were still closed, even though I was in uniform, even though I was on duty. We got up there, we spent 4 days, we set up our command center, prepared to receive people, contracted with hotels, and then the call came to stand down because it was a recovery operation and we weren't needed. So I had to then turn around and drive back down past the World Trade Center, still smoldering, and And I was more resolved than ever to do what I had to do to serve my country. So that was in September, waited. We got a warning order in November that our unit was going to be going over to Kuwait to operate the U.S. theater hospital there. And we would be leaving sometime in April. So January came, February came. We started to go away for training and get our pre-mobilization training. And my unit landed in Kuwait City in April of May of 2002. We were there, we set up, we were the only U.S. hospital in that region, so we had patients coming from Afghanistan. We had the first casualties from Kuwait. 2 Marines were killed on Falaik Island. They came to our hospital and sadly both expired there. But we were prepared and ready to go, and the clock kept ticking and the clock kept ticking, and the Army said, well, you're going to go home in December. And I thought, oh my goodness, what is going to happen? We were like a 300-man unit, and we were going to be released. And the general over there, General George Waitman, he came to me and he said, I'd like you to come back because something big's going to happen after the first of the year. So generals came to me and said, would you come back? And I said, of course. Well, my wife was home here. I got back into the States, came back for Christmas. I said, I asked him, can I stay home for Christmas? And he said, yes, you'll be home for Christmas. So I spent Christmas and told her that I was going back. And she says, how many are going back? I said, just me. So it was a very tough Christmas, but January 1st came and I flew out of New York City and went down to Baltimore and back overseas. And it was a frantic run up to the war at that point. We knew the war was coming. We weren't sure when. We were ordering supplies. And he gave me the job of bringing in all of the medical units that were required for what was going to, we were then under Operation Enduring Freedom, what was going to eventually become Operation Iraqi Freedom. So I had a list of about 75 units that I would contact and make sure they had the provisions, and I set up their hospital sites and we erected tents for them. And the tents, the hospitals we set up were in tents, but they had a liner in them because we really thought that chemical weapons might be used. So we were prepared for everything. And I was working 7 days a week, 20 hours a day, and I was loving it. I mean, I would talk to my wife on my MWR calls home, and she'd be like, how can you be so calm? I said, because this is what I was born to do. This is where I was meant to be at this point in my life. Set up all the hospitals, brought them over, medical units, detachments and companies, and we were all set up. And then the general said to me, well, we have some foreign units coming in. Can you help with them? So I brought in a Japanese unit, a Lithuanian detachment, Korean, German. We set up all the units. And again, I was happy to be, and I was working, it was truly an army of one. And then they gave me 2 assistants finally toward the end. And then we're all waiting for the war to begin. And then we began the air war. And we knew the night before, the general had a briefing, and he says, tomorrow morning we kick off. So I was with a unit, and this is a funny and scary story. Remember I talked about how they took care of me when I was a young lieutenant? We were over and we were wearing our chemical suits most of the time, or carrying them with us. And this major and I went over to get money from the finance detachment. We figured, oh, not a big problem at all. The distance from Olean High School to downtown. And we're in there and the sirens went off. They were shooting scuds at us. And we painfully realized neither of us had our chemical suits with us. So these young soldiers ran in, they were in theirs, and they said, we're going to lock you officers, you gentlemen in this office, put wet towels by the door. And they each gave us an atropine pen, and we sat staring at each other with the pen, because if our eyes were to roll, the other one was supposed to stick you and save you. I ran back afterwards, put my suit on, and didn't take it off for over 45 days, only to change it for another one. That was all we wore, were chemical suits. Went up into Iraq right after the troops crossed over to set up medical units there, and I set up a couple of hospitals. Most of them were in Kuwait, but set up a few up in Iraq, up in Al-Nasiriyah, up in Basra province. Saw some of the devastation down on the Al-Fal Peninsula. The city of Basra, it was amazing, but We were very proud. We were very, very maintained that what we were doing was right, and we were greeted by the people with almost like hero status. Some terrible moments there. I had a Spanish hospital, American and a Spanish hospital unit set up right outside the prison down in Camp Buca, which was down in Basra province. And I had a hospital ship off the coast. It was right up on the dock, I should say, in the city. And that was a Spanish hospital. They had beds on it. And we had a young baby brought in by the parents, and she had hydrocephalus, water on the brain, and we knew she wasn't going to make it. But I went and I spoke to the folks back down in Kuwait City at the embassy, and I said, I need some toys to brighten this place up. And the next day they drove up in Humvees full of stuffed animals. And the father of this little girl was there, and I'm going to get emotional now, but he was there, and he was holding my hand, because they wouldn't let him in as a foreign national, so I had to go receive him at the gate, or one of us had to receive him at the gate every day. And he would always hold your hand. And when he saw what we were doing, he was crying, and I was crying. And the little girl passed away after we had given her this big animal. But we felt that she was happier knowing that, there was someone else there for her. And it was one of the best days of my life. And I stayed there, continued to set up hospitals and staff it and get equipment. And people in America were amazing. The Spanish ship had an anesthesia machine that needed a piece of equipment, just a small vaporizer cup, and it didn't come with the equipment. It was from America. It was from a company here. I probably can't say the name, but Abbott Laboratories. And I got on the sat phone from the ship, and I called Abbott on a weekend and woke up some security guard. And I said, I need this piece of equipment because we have 2 badly burned boys that need surgery, and we cannot do it unless we have this. And I really didn't think anything was going to come from it. And the guy said, call me back in 2 hours. And I called him back. He had woken up some vice president who woke up someone else. They went, they pulled the piece from inventory. They flew it to Spain commercially at their expense. The Spanish Air Force picked it up, flew it to Kuwait. The U.S. Marines picked it up in a helicopter, flew it to the ship, and lowered it to us. And within 2 days, those children had their surgery. So when I came back, every time I saw someone from Abbott, I'd thank them. They'd be like, what are you talking about? I said, well, this is teamwork. This is what Americans do. This is what people do. This is the humanity of man. I was there, and my orders expired to come home. And I told my wife, I'm in the middle of so much stuff, I don't want to come home. She says, well, what are you going to do? I said, well, I'm just going to stay. I stayed past my date. They're supposed to get on a plane. I never got on the plane. And one day the general sees me at the staff meeting, and he says, Joe, weren't you supposed to go home? I said, yes, sir, 4 days ago. He says, what are you doing? I said, because there's work to be done. My mission isn't complete. He goes, yes, it is. And he took my cell phone, and he told the sergeant major, pack the colonel up, get him to the plane tonight, and he's going home. So while you're supposed to have a week home before your orders expire, mine expired actually over the Atlantic Ocean. So I get to Fort Dix, and they said, you're not supposed to be here. Well, I am. So they said, I said, I'll just out-process myself. I know what to do. I'll ride around, got a rental car. I drove around all the spots. And what normally takes 2 weeks, I did in like 4 days because it was an army of one again. And I got on the plane, and I flew back home to Buffalo. My wife met me, and that was the end of that. Proudest time of my life. Bar none, anything I've done, I'm proudest of that time. Came back to the reserves. Then I got a call from my old commander. He said, we're bringing the gang back together. And I went to Kosovo, and I was the XO of the hospital there. And I spent a 11-month tour in Kosovo, and I was packing up to come home, and the unit following us, it was always an American unit, we set up the American hospital in Kosovo. It was a German, German, Italian, and an American hospital. And I'd been there plenty of time, packed all my clothes up, we were stuffed into these little temporary rooms because the next unit had come. I had helped them come back for 2 weeks to help them get ready to go, and like 3 days before I'm going home, that commander comes to me and said, I'd like you to stay for another tour, another 11 months. I'm like, okay. called my wife, another fun phone call, and told her, but she understood. She says, this is what you love to do. And I stayed for another 11 months, and we had some, again, wonderful times. That was more of a nation building, where our mission was a freedom of movement and self and sustainable environment. So we did lessons for them on health. I presented the first multinational seminar on Crimean Congo hemorrhagic fever. So I gave a lecture in English, and then there was an Albanian interpreting next to me with the same set of slides, and then a Serbian with the next set of slides. And these were two groups that were so diametrically opposed. It was a religious, the Muslim Serbs and the Christian Albanians. They were fighting over the control of Kosovo. And I told my boss, I'm going to present this as an us versus them being the organism. And I gave this talk about how we and our people and how we needed to work together and collaborate and cooperate. And at the end of that, they were actually shaking, at least the medical professionals were shaking hands, and that became a monthly series hosted alternately by, instead of an American, hosted by the Albanian Medical Services or the Serbian Medical Services. So it was, again, another proud moment of America doing what we do best, bringing help and assistance to the people who needed it. We were there for that second tour, and at the end of that, I did come home, re-entered reserve status, and I ended my career actually as a battalion commander out in Kansas. I was stationed at Fort Riley, Kansas as a civilian for that whole Kosovo tour, and retired the 388th Multifunctional Medical Battalion in Hayes, Kansas. I was their first commander. They had converted from a stock medical battalion to this multifunctional, where we had a number of different entities. I was their first commander, and again, just proud to have served 31 years, 31 days. You know, the funny thing is, when we were in Iraq, I was the XO of the hospital, the second in command, and deputy surgeon for CFLIC. And one day they came to me and they said, we may have found a microbiological site out in the desert. Would you and a couple of the younger microbiologists come and do an assessment of it? And we did. And that was the only time I did it, was that one mission.
In your whole life?
Yeah, but I mean, I did it as a civilian.
Oh, okay.
But in the military, yeah, I always did leadership jobs, because I felt that those assignments were honestly where I'm best suited. I mean, I like to lead. I like to be at the tip of the spear, if you will, at the forefront. I just like to be I don't want to say in charge. My wife would say that, but I like to especially when there's a lack of leadership, I like to step forward. So, yeah. Ironically, no one in my country and my family had served before. My parents, my brothers, my grandparents were not in the military. But even as a young child, I don't know what it was, but anyone you would have asked, that was what I was going to do. And I was going to go to West Point. I mean, we lived not far from there. We're about 40 minutes away. So I would go up often as I could. And my former commander would say that I'm a military geek, because quick story. So my cousin, distant cousin, was in the Army National Guard. And he took me out, I was about 7 years old, to the Kingsbridge Armory in New York City. He was National Guard. And they had gotten these new Jeeps, the M151 Jeeps, which anyone from Vietnam knew. And I was a little kid, and he says, do you want to see it? And I told the guy, yes. And I gave him the cubic displacement and the weight and what it would carry. And the motor sergeant was like shocked. This little kid, he goes, do you want to ride in one? Oh, yeah. And we rode around the Bronx. But he says, this kid knows more about it than most of our soldiers do, because I would read Army magazine. Now, a friend of my family, Joe Barnwell, he was a major in the reserves, and they were probably the closest family to us. He and his wife were both served in World War II. And I would read his Army Reserve magazine and his magazine of the U.S. Army. I would read all his magazines, and when kids were reading comic books, I was reading technical manuals. I mean, I just loved it. So I could walk on any base and point out any piece of equipment and tell you all about it from memory.
So you graduated from high school, what year?
73.
73. So, same as my brother. So you guys were like either the last year or the year before, or the year after.
The year after the draft. I have my draft card.
They stopped the lottery.
Yep. And I told my parents if I get called, because, I was planning to go to college. I mean,
Yeah.
but if I don't go to West Point, I'm not going to take my deferment. I'm just going to go. And they ended the draft. But I've always been prepared to go. And my mother passed away. Both my parents passed away before I deployed. My brother Larry said it's a good thing because it would have been painful to see you climbing the steps to the airplane with her holding on to your leg as you dragged her up the steps. But I've always felt that we're put on this earth to do something, and that was what I was put on this earth to do.
How many hospitals were you running at one time in Kuwait?
7. So each had a commander, but I was overseeing them. I made sure they had a place to be set up, and it was funny. We laid down these big giant footprints of platforms because you couldn't plant on the desert, and then we built the hospital off that. Well, the company that we contracted with ran out of wood, so they brought teak over from Germany, and the floor was worth more than you could imagine. Beautiful teak flooring. So I told the guy, there was a unit from Washington State coming in with the 62nd Med Brigade, and I said, bring a lot of plywood with you, because when you go home, you're going to want to swap it out for the teak. And it was just everything. Every day was different, and every day was another challenge. And when the general, he would always say to me, "Oh, we got a problem. I said, "No, this is an opportunity to excel." And I've used that phrase in my civilian life. I taught nursing part time, just to stay occupied when I was working out in Kansas. But I would always tell the students, or our med lab students, or soldiers, I'd say everything is an opportunity to excel. Don't look at it as a challenge. Don't look at it as a hardship. I mean, when they were shooting rockets at us, we're over there, and they were shooting the Scuds. They said, "Are you worried?" We would go under this is a funny story. So you'd go under the tables. We were in the command center, and it was a plywood table. So I'm under there, and General Waitman was there, and I said to my buddy, I go, "My back hurts." I said, "This wood's not going to protect us at all." So I stood up. And everyone goes, "Get under the table." I said, "It's not going to protect you. If a rocket hits this building, we're done. At least I'm going to go with a healthy back." And one by one, all the people in the medical unit stood up. So the surgeon center section was standing up, and everyone else was hiding under the tables. So then our motto is, "We don't cower. We're the medics. We don't cower." And we never went under the tables again. But my wife was on the phone with me one night, and you heard this loud boom, and I go, "Gotta go," and I hung up. And I couldn't call her for 2 days because a rocket had struck right by us. And she was terrified. So I know that, it's great that we have so much accessibility, but it also is tough on the families, because when they don't hear from you, then they worry even more. We felt that if you treat people with respect, the majority of them, again, they knew we were there to help them, and that was very important. So they really did love us. But that example of holding hands with that man every day coming in, I said, I probably saved more American lives in the future by showing the humanity and not treating everyone as an adversary. Not that we didn't have our fair share of people shooting at us that it was adversarial, but it's personal. It's not based on your religion, your ethnicity, it's more your disposition. It's how you choose to maintain yourself. And I said, I'm never going to stoop to the point where I'm not going to belittle anyone, or I treat everyone with courtesy, professionalism, and respect. And we were prepared to treat Americans, Iraqis, any other country, or when we were in Kosovo, the Kosovo Serbs or Albanians, all with the same standard of care. The one thing about the medical departments of all the branches is we treat every patient based on their acuity. And we had a number of of Iraqi patients in our hospital, and we treated them with professionalism and respect. I mean, the language was a little bit hard. I got good at, I had a little picture book, and if I had to show them something, I'd point to the picture, and that way they understood what I was trying to ask them, or give them the book and let them, a phrase that they would recognize that would be translated. But it was tough, but, that's part of the mission, is to take care of those who need it. Yeah, it was amazing. And I would go back, if they let me go back to be that age again, I'd go back tomorrow and I'd go back down and sign up again for another 31 years. And I admit, the medical department, we had a lot of privations. It was difficult, but we weren't those poor Joes and Janes out in the field. Even though we were out there with them, they would always protect us first, which was like those finance soldiers. Lock you officers in this room, and we're going to protect you from that Scud attack. I mean, they don't even know us. I was on the airfield one day with my sergeant. We were bringing in equipment, receiving equipment, and the siren went off, and I had to run a great distance. And we started running, and the Air Force sergeant at the bunker, he went like this. He raised his hands, and he shut the door. And we dove into a ditch, and there's a culvert, and we were there, and my sergeant was so mad. He was ready to kill the guy. And I said, he could let us die if we had to, but he had to save everyone else in that room, and it's for the greater good. I wasn't upset at all. I was scared.
Hey, I look at it this way. It's like the two people that I would try to save more than anything else is the one who's going to feed me and the one who's going to keep me alive.
Right. But they were always, we were very afraid of chemical weapons. Yeah. And he says, I have to shut the seal the door, sir. I'm sorry. And when he opened it, he says, he came out, he was very apologetic. I said, son, you got to do what you got to do. That's your job. Do your job. And that's your job. Yeah, my wife thinks I'm kind of crazy, some of the, how I rationalize things, but it's why you're put here on this earth is to take care of people and to do the right thing for the right reason. And I think what I did was the right thing for the right reasons.